Welcome back to Sunday Square Off. For more than a year now, the Maricopa County Board and the new county recorder, Justin Heap, have waged a courtroom fight over their election responsibilities. The Arizona Supreme Court unanimously settled the dispute in Heap's favor. Now, two government bodies that worked hand in hand for decades to run Maricopa County's elections are walled off from each other. What could that division mean for your vote and our elections? I'll ask Sasha Hupka. She covers Arizona elections for VoteBeat US. Welcome back to Square Off.
Thanks for having me.
Your report on the settlement gave readers a picture. You drew a picture of the broken relationship between the county board and the recorder. Describe that scene in the final hours of the settlement negotiations.
I want you to picture you're in downtown Phoenix, you're in this windowless jury room, and outside there is this monsoon storm just raging. Like wind, rain, lightning, like stuff is going down outside. And inside in these windowless jury rooms, in one of them you've got recorder Justin Heap and sort of his crew of people, right? His senior staff, you've got his attorneys, and then in another room, you know, maybe across the hall or down the hall a little ways, you've got Kate Brophy-McGee, who's the chair of the board, Debbie Lesko, who's the vice chair, and you've got their senior staff in the elections department and their attorneys. And in between the two, there's a judge just shuttling back and forth with agreement terms. And finally, around 10 p.m., as this storm is like raging, they came to a deal and it got signed. And that is how this agreement was made. And I think it's such a metaphor for the agreement, because that visual of them in these completely separate rooms is effectively what this agreement does.
In the middle of the storm brewing around.
The storm of the 26th general election, yes.
A dark and stormy night. Now, I do want to underline this long legal battle was a victory for Justin Heap that could affect county elections operations statewide. But let's talk about Maricopa County. What are the key deal points that voters need to know?
I think the easiest way, without, you know, getting into all of the minutia, because this detail does like go in a very, very detailed sense. You get, you know, this very specific thing, you get that very specific thing. The way I would generally sum it up is that Justin Heap continues to have full control over voter registration. That is outlined very clearly in state law. He gets full control over early in-person voting, and really also over mail voting. And specifically, you know, you might recall there was this dispute over Dropbox locations earlier this year. The board traditionally had set those, and then Heap sent them a letter sort of right as they were about to vote to approve them, and said, you know, that he felt he was the one who was supposed to set these Dropbox locations. And by setting these locations, the board was doing something illegal, and election workers who collected ballots from them could be arrested, and there was this whole thing, right? Heap now has the ability to set those Dropbox locations. On the board side, they've got election day voting, and they will continue to count the votes as they always have, and they will be able to canvass, as is outlined in state law, certify the election results.
And that might be their one kind of control on Heap, if there is one. Now, Supervisor C. Gallardo was the only supervisor to reject the settlement. He said county taxpayers are spending $20 million, giving it to Justin Heap, to bulk up a second office to run elections. Is he right?
I think that that's one way of interpreting it. I mean, certainly the number is right? There's about $20 million as a result of this deal that, not right away, but over the course of several years, is going to go into the recorder's office. And most of that is going to go toward new staff. He wants a new IT system so that his IT system can be completely separate from the county. You know, equipment, that's where that money is going. But I think that the agreement, you know, I maybe wouldn't call it a second elections office, but what I would say is it certainly draws this wall. And I think that that raises a question, right? Of one, these offices have, you know, worked very closely together in the past. Can they run a smooth election with this wall up? And then two, I think it raises this question of what is Heap going to do with this newfound autonomy?
And that gets to my next question, and something I mentioned earlier. This isn't just a legal separation, it's a political one. You mentioned the two sides working hand in hand. For the 20 years or so I've been covering elections, that has always been the case. But what became clear during this litigation was, for the first time in 2 decades, overtly political actors, starting with Justin Heap, are embedded in a significant piece Maricopa County's election machinery. You know, Heap's lawyer works for Trump advisor Stephen Miller's law firm. 2 other lawyers on his legal team are election deniers, Trump supporters. Heap wanted a nationally known election denier as a mediator in this case. That didn't happen. And so given all that, with the president's renewed focus on the elections and taking charge of the elections, what could that mean in November?
Well, what this agreement means is that Heap is going to, have a lot more autonomy in terms of how he runs his office. He still has to follow state law. That's very clear. But I do think that the question that you sort of posed to me, it gets to the heart of this, right? Because Heap, the whole divide between the board and Heap has been that you have a board that is, became nationally known for sort of standing up to Trump, right, and saying no. And a lot of members of this board are new, but still, that was sort of what that board was known for. And at least 2 of its 5 members were, sort of there when some of this was happening. And then you had Heap, who was backed by MAGA-aligned allies. And who we know, right, based on my reporting, has talked to the federal government, has expressed support for the Trump administration and, what they are trying to do on the elections front. And so, I do think that at the end of it, that is really what the divide is between Recorder Heap and the board. I think that's a central theme that we're going to continue to probably see play out.
And to be clear, voters voted for Justin Heap. He won the election. I'm sure many of them are cheering this, but this is unprecedented in Maricopa County.
I think that this is a very unique situation. I can't speak to what things were like 20 years ago. I haven't been here maybe quite as long as you have, Bram, but what I can tell you is that when I first started covering elections here in the aftermath of 2020, at the time, the recorder's office and the elections department actually shared staff, like not just resources, they shared staff. Their communications person at the time was serving both of them. And since then, there's sort of been this gradual, division that has taken place. This is a very significant step toward complete division. It really is complete division with this agreement. And we're just gonna have to see how this plays out. And the general election will be the first test of that.
Professional and political division. All right, Sasha Hopka, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
That's our show for this week. Thanks very much to all of our guests. Thank you so much for joining us. See you back here next weekend for another round of Square Off.